Joe, if you'll unmute yourself, please.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you. Thank all of you for being here. You're the reason I'm sober today and trying to live a life of peace and serenity. Like you said, my name is Joe. I'm from Dacre, Ontario, which is about 100 miles west-northwest of the city of Ottawa in Ontario. I was born in, this is a rural community. It's a crossroads, really. I was born here 79 years ago. I'm married. I've been married for 57 years. I've been sober in AA since March 26, 1979. That makes it 42 years. So those are some statistics about me. As a child growing up here, you know, I guess I call my parents kind and judicious. It was a very orthodox, traditional sort of community. Everybody knew each other. Neighbors helped each other out. Parties, there was always alcohol and drinking at parties. I'm going to say mainly Irish. It's quite an Irish community. And the parish church, of course, was St. Patrick's. And I was an altar boy there and all the rest of that good stuff. And so that was my childhood growing up. There was a fair amount of structure. I was pretty good in school. And of course, in school and church, we were taught all of the rules. And you know, these rules were rules that I took with me. And as I grew out of them, at an age maybe 15 or 16, you know, I found where I could never measure up. And you know, we were being taught things that were preparing us for the hereafter, and probably less about what was the here and now, what was going on in our lives. A lot of that stuff we lived and learned as we went along as a youngster. That's how I did it. You know, when 15, 14 years old, I think that was the first 15 I was when I had my first serious encounter with alcohol. I had tasted beer. I loved it and loved the taste of scotch. My dad would sit down with my mom and they'd have a glass of scotch at night. We ran a general store in this crossroads community. There might have been 200 people here. That's the population. There are less now. So it was a gathering place at night. This was the 50s, and people came there and told stories. I love that. And I like to participate in the festivities and the weddings and all of this. So my first serious drink was cheap wine. And I've got to tell you about the first drunk, and the first time we got a hold of a couple of bottles of it, we got drunk. And I developed all sorts of courage. And I picked a fight with a guy twice my size and got thoroughly trashed. But that was something I would do again and again. And 16, 17, I was in high school. We were bused to high school. And you know, a 15, 16-year-old, I had a lot of trouble with shyness. I was withdrawn. I wasn't very sure of myself. And you know, all the conflicts with the hormones bebopping and popping all over the place. And I'm a wallflower. Boy, I found alcohol, and that ever do the trick. I have two brothers, one older, one younger. And large families. We had like large extended families, grandparents around, a lot of cousins and nephews and so forth. So that was growing up here. In 1960, my dad sent me, he was a teacher at the time too. He ran a general store and taught school. I went to school in Eastern Canada, in New Brunswick, because they thought I could do well as a forestry engineer. this is a mixed farming and forestry logging area. So I was kind of born into it, sawdust in my blood, sort of thing, because these are the stories I heard. So I went east, and my drinking really picked up a lot of steam. So I had to finance this stuff, and I work in the summer, and my parents would send me money, and I cajole my way into my drinking habits, and so that's the way it went for me. I was a weekly drinker. For the most part, I remembered what went on. I wasn't suffering from blackouts then. I flunked my first year badly, went back and recovered 1 year, and then took off and went to California to see if I could make a mark out there. Well, I was with another fellow. There was several of us in some cars, and a lot of drinking. And I was there and got a job illegally, and then was asked to pack my bags and come home. So I did that. 5 days on a bus, and my green garbage bag full of clothes, and back I came. Back to school the next year. In 1964, I got married. My wife was going to school at the same university, and we graduated and became teachers, the two of us. And she had a brother who was a lawyer. I watched him. He was quite an example. And I followed his footsteps in a law school. I taught for a year, then law school. I stayed sober enough to write exams. And but by the time I was admitted to the bar in 1971, I was drinking regularly. We had no children yet. And in 73, I took a job with a corporation, and I'm trying to get through this part of the story, because really what my story is in page 28 of our book, and it's in my own language and from my own point of view, how I established a relationship with God, but how I got there. My drinking got really bad between 1971 and 79, and I was a corporate lawyer traveling, and we had business to do in Washington, D.C. I was revising pension plans, because in the U.S. you change your pension laws in 74, and I was working with a law firm in that city, and I was very inquisitive, and I wanted to explore, and I explored places where I probably shouldn't have been exploring. One famous place was you had a congressman or a senator by the name of Mills who got into trouble at the Silver Slipper, I think. Well, I used to spend some time there, and we also had work to do in Boston, and I found out about a place up there called the Teddy Bear Lounge. So that was my drinking career as a corporate lawyer, and I found all the right places for me in those cities. I don't think I'll say any more about that. You can guess the rest of that story. So my home life, by this time I had 3 children, and this is coming up to 1979, and they were 11, 10, and 6, or 11, 10, and 5. I'm not sure. And I could walk to work. I was working in northwestern New Brunswick, on the border between Maine and New Brunswick. And my work took me to Maine and the province of New Brunswick. I worked for a paper company. We had a pulp mill in Canada, and it was linked by pipeline to a paper mill in the US. And I would walk to work, to and from work. The head offices were on the Canadian side. And I drink heavily, and near the end of the week and on the weekend, and then I'd lay off Monday and Tuesday, maybe a little bit Wednesday, and I'd swear I'd never go back to the club again. I got to go home. And by Thursday, I'd be in the curling club again on the way home, and you'd sit down and you'd have the first 2 or 3, and you'd be feeling sort of miraculous, that feeling. Maybe it's a glow. It's a kind of a miraculous thing. It's what the spirit did to me, the alcohol spirit. I have a few more. I always wanted more. And then by 11 o'clock, I'd be pixelated thoroughly. and I'd wander home to face the superior soul I married. Well, the last night was the 26th of March in 1979. And my friends let me out of the car. We had been over in Maine on a so-called fishing trip, and they let me out, and I wandered up to the door early in the wee hours. And oddly enough, my wife had her bags all packed, and she walked out the door. So I got to bed. I can't think much about. I got upstairs and went to bed. My 3 children were sleeping. I got into bed, and I'll never forget this. And I guess I was well into the night, and something woke me up, and there seemed to be movement in the ceiling, and there were noises, and I had a feeling that I wasn't going to live. I was going to die. And you know, they describe this this thing in I think it's in A Vision for You in our book. The feeling was, I try to describe it in my own words. I just have difficulty, but it's terror, bewilderment, frustration, and despair. And I slid out of bed on my knees, and that's what I felt like. And I asked for help as honestly as I could. I'd asked for help before, you know, in various situations, you know, what they call them jackpot prayers or foxhole prayers. I could tell you one such prayer. I was in an airplane with a chap, and the engine stopped at 3,000 feet. We were in the bush over Boys Town, New Brunswick, and some oil came out of the engine. And I said a jackpot prayer. Get me out of this, and you know, I'll change my ways. I don't know what sort of promises I'd make, but I'd make them. We got down. We found a strip. It was the 29th of January. We were in a plane with wheels on, and we got down safely. And we got a ride, got our stuff out of the aircraft, and made it to a Legion in Boys Town, New Brunswick, and got drunk that afternoon. So I quickly forgot all about the prayer I said, but it got us in. So I was on my knees in my bedroom in 1979. I had known a little bit about AA. About 1970, I drove home one weekend to Ontario, and my young brother was coming home, and I knew he had stopped drinking. I had known my older brother had stopped a couple of years before that, but he was older and sort of more distant from me. I was closer to my young brother. So when he was coming home, I thought, I want to go up and meet him. So I loaded some stuff in my car, and away I went. And my wife was at home, and we just had a baby, I think the year before the first child was born. So I arrived there, and he was there with 2 other guys, an old timer who was Ted, I found out was his sponsor. And there was a guy, another younger guy who he was sponsoring. And Ted was speaking at a Mother's Day roundup in Petawawa, Ontario. So I drank a few beers. It kind of screwed my drinking up, but I looked at my brother, and his eyes were bright, and their jokes were funny. And it was really enjoyable. I never forgot that. But jump ahead back to 1979, and I'm on my knees. And that's what I remember. I remember going back to bed and sleeping fairly soundly, and I got up, and in probably late morning, and I had an idea in my head. I've got to do something about this. You know, my world had just fallen apart. I got on the phone and I called my older brother, and I said, I think I might have a problem with alcohol. I said, there's a guy up the street. I was going to get into Rotary Club one time, and I heard this fellow talk, and he was a counselor with the CNRL. and he probably knows something about alcoholism. And I said, I think he's connected with Alcoholics Anonymous, and would you call him for me? So I've heard another fellow on the Buffalo group say, I almost missed this thing. And that's how close I came to missing this thing. I called my brother to ask somebody else for help. And but I didn't miss it, because later on in that afternoon, that day, I called him, and he came down to the house, and I can remember a few things about the meeting, but he said, I'm going to do the talking. He said, can you make coffee? And I didn't know how. So he showed me how to make coffee. I mean, we made coffee, and I listened a lot. And he asked me what I was willing to do to get better. And I said, I would do anything. And I meant it. I meant it from the bottom of my heart. So that was the start. He said, I'll pick you up tomorrow night, or what night it was. And that's how we started our relationship. And he adopted me as a sponsee. I didn't ask him to be sponsored for years later. And I said, are you my sponsor, Earl? He said, yeah, I always have been. So that's how that worked. So I was sort of an adopted sponsee, and he trucked me off to meetings. Before we went to the meeting, he said, you're going to hear talk about God and higher power when you go there. And in the first talk we had, he learned a little bit about me, quite a bit about me, that I had gotten away from the faith that I grew up in. I'd gotten completely away from it. And so he was preparing me for what might go on. So I went to this meeting, and when I get in there, I was terrified, of course. And there was some talk of higher power and God, but as the meeting went on, what was getting to me was how honest these men could talk about themselves and what they were saying. And I thought, God, do I ever want some of that? Would I ever like to be able to do that? It was it hit me. So that's how I left that meeting. I left it thinking, yeah, I want some more of this. But if my old habits were the way they were true to themselves, I'd start to feel better about Wednesday or Thursday, and then I'd think, well, maybe one more. But this guy kept on me, and we went to meetings, and then I got to know some of the other members, and that was the starting of fellowship. And to me, it was, I got introduced to the big book and the 12 and 12, and I took the 12 and 12 right away. I really enjoyed reading it, but it was the road trips we take, and the talks, and I'd hear something, and it would sort of ring a bell with me. I'd click, and then I'd talk to my sponsor about it, and he put some clarity to it, and so they all became events that became part of my life, and got me into the program. And my sponsor was the one that sort of kept me guided, and got me very quickly into doing step 4. Now, I don't believe I surrendered the first meeting I went to. I just put my toes in a bit. I come in, I got my feet wet, splashed around a bit, and I was pretty tentative. Did I fully admit that I was an alcoholic? I guess I did, but did I surrender? I don't think so. I think it was more like compliance. I said I would do what I was told, and I did what I was told. And as I did what I was told, I got what I needed. It's as simple as that. And step 2, we were going to meetings in Madawaska, Maine as well. It was a discussion group over there. We had a discussion group on our side, and then with speaker meetings, and we drove around to other places like Caribou and Fort Kent, and we put meetings on at the minimum security prison up in St. Hilaire, and we also put meetings on at, there was an Air Force base, Loring in Maine, at Limestone, and there was a farm there, and all the groups took turns putting meetings on there. So I got very active. My sponsor got me very active in that sort of service, and I was arguing and getting argumentative about this higher power, and coming to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. And it was all this question about God and higher power. it was, it wasn't something I was jumping right into. Until Bob asked me a question one night across the table. He was getting frustrated with my yappiness, I guess. And he said, well, don't you meet with other alcoholics? And he knew I did, you know. And I said, yes, I do. And he said, and how are those meetings? I said, wonderful. You know, I come away with something. I come away with more, not less, every time we have a meeting. Well, he said, isn't that a power greater than you? There's two people. Yes, I had to agree with him. That's how it started. That was a sort of a crack in my armor that let a bit of light in, and it came in that slow. It started that slow. And step three, you know, I remember talking to my sponsor, and he was telling me how they did it. He said he was in Presque Isle, and the old timers took the guys upstairs. There'd be 2 or 3 old timers, and they'd take the guy upstairs, and he'd be on his knees to do step three. Well, that scared the hell out of me. I didn't, you know, it's just what's going to happen. So that was the sort of fear and worry that I came into the first year or so of this fellowship. And I was worried about having to speak. And he said, you don't worry, I'll tell you when you can speak. When you'll speak when you've got something to tell, get something to share. And I can recall one night I was reading the 12 steps. The door opened and a priest walked in, this Father Pat from Van Buren, Maine. And as soon as he walked in the door and I saw the collar, and I started to shake, and I lost my voice. I just won't forget the feeling. Something scared me. So that was first year. My first time I talked, I was walking home, and sponsor came along in his car, and he said, Joe, there's a meeting in Quebec City, and it's just at the end of Carnival, just after Carnival, as Lent starts. And he said, we need a speaker, and would you like to speak? And before I could, you know, weasel my way out of it, he rolled up his window and drove away. So that's how I did it the first time. And it was one of the most terrifying things I've ever done. But here's how it happened. My wife and I, my wife was with me, we drove up, and it was Friday night. I was sitting in a meeting with sort of before the conference. I was scheduled to speak the next afternoon at 2. And there was a commotion up at the front. And Bob was supposed to be there to speak, and he wasn't around. So Earl turned around and said, well, Joe's here, he'll speak. So that's how he did it the first time. And I got up, and, you know, it was like, there could have been 1,000 people there, but there might've been 50, I don't know. And I got through it. I came home, and I called my young brother, because I was on a cloud when I come off that. It was, you know, I had done this for the first time, and I was telling him what went on. And so I prattled on for a while. Near the end of it, he said, well, Joe, give it about 5 years and the fog might start to lift. So reality, that was my first year in sobriety. My sponsor got me fairly active in service. Starting with cleaning the ashtrays, putting out the chairs. And I didn't go to treatment. I wasn't in a treatment center. And I was a drinker. I didn't try the dry goods. I was a 100 proof alcoholic, liquid stuff. Most of the guys there were, and and the girls. There was a few women. But see, this was a French community on the New Brunswick side. There was 98% Francophone, maybe 2% English. So we had an English meeting. I got a call one day, and he said, come with me, we're going on a 12-step call. So my first experience, 12-step call, we drive to a small community, and we stop at a doctor's office and go upstairs. And I said nothing. I said, I'm not going to say anything. I'll just listen. He more or less told me to do that. So I was an observer, and he said, we were there for quite a while. Doc, he said, stick out your tongue. And the doc stood up and stuck his tongue out. And I learned afterwards his tongue was white. So Earl pulls a Mickey out of his pocket. gives him a good tall glass of whiskey, gives it to him. So this was how we brought him down. We were there about 4 hours with this man, and then drove him to the Edmonton hospital, where he went on I guess he got on an IV. And as far as I know, he's still sober and very active in AA in that area. And my sponsor was quite a bird dog, and very active in service, and got me into that. And of course, then the company started to see that I was doing things maybe a bit differently, and I started getting promotions. And I'll whip through a lot of this pretty quickly, but I went through a fourth and a fifth step with my sponsor Earl, and he was always encouraging me to get involved in the community. So I did. We got involved in education, and we started an English language school in the community, and it was that was controversial, but I'm happy to have had a small role to play in all of that. And I was getting more and more involved in some of the affairs of the local church, and I also heard about a monastery over in Rogersville, New Brunswick, run by the Trappists. So I visited with them, and it's fairly important in my journey, because I went there several times, and I think it was one of the last times I was there. As I was leaving, an old monk came out the door. They just spoke French. They didn't speak English. But by this time, the company had Frenched me. They sent me up to Quebec twice and got me so that I could speak French. So he came out and he said something to me in French, and he reached, his hand came out of his sleeve. He had his hood on, and he handed me a rosary. And I hadn't used one of those things since my mother would get us down after supper, my young brother and I, and we'd say it on our knees as youngsters. And that was many, many years before that. So I took that and thanked him and got in my car. And before I got home, I had to drive through about 80 miles of forest. I had to stop. I stopped my vehicle and got out, and I broke down. I don't know why, but that may have been my first spiritual experience as a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. So probably my first experience was on my knees the day after my last drink. So that was to have an effect on me. It's been something that's helped me in step 11, and I'll get to that hopefully a little bit later on. I advanced in my work. The company put a lot of money into training me, sent me off to schools, executive training, relationship training. I went to a course at Harvard Law School for 3 weeks on that. It was something that taught me a lot that I would have probably learned in AA, but it was pretty concentrated, and I probably got a concentrated amount of it, and it helped me immensely. So also I was looking after my health more. I stopped smoking. I started jogging. I took an art course. There wasn't all just AA meetings. I was trying to get involved more in community as well. And I was more involved with my family. Before I was, I'd come home, hand check to my wife, and sort of wander off. I was becoming more of a father. And thanks to the fellowship and all of the road trips and the talks we had and the sponsorship I had, that it was fellowship and sponsorship, and then relationship. And the relationship with God was coming. It was slow, but it was making some progress. And I think 11, 8, 9 years in sobriety at the time. And the president retired. And before he did, he came around, and I was a vice president then. There was 5 of us, vice presidents. And he said, "You fellas are any of you interested in the top job? Put your name in." So I did. And the alcoholic, grandiose ideas, and I had lots of them. And but it was a learning experience for me. I put my name in. I didn't get the job, and the chap that got the job let everybody go that put their name in, is one after the other. I think I was the third one to get fired. So I left there in 1990, and I was harboring some anger, a lot of anger, and I moved up to Ontario and decided to go back to school. Another alcoholic idea. Now I'd gotten away from my sponsor and away from my home group, and I wasn't going to regular meetings. But I wasn't drinking. But I wasn't sober either. I mean, if you define sobriety as habitual moderation in thought and action, I was a bit squirrely. I was back in school. I was doing a thesis in Native Studies on negotiation, and I spent almost 4 years doing that. And I guess I had a moment of clarity, and we had moved back to Renfrew. My family, we were all together, and moved back to the Renfrew area. I had got a sponsor, joined a home group, and had a sponsor that got me very active, because he was a guy that said, what we have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. And to him, spiritual condition meant getting into action and staying at it. And well, he got me into action. I was on the board of a recovery home, and we were doing meetings, lunch meetings, and we were getting the lunches for these guys that couldn't afford them. And well, we did a lot of that kind of work. That was how I got back in and got active in AA. And I had spent a year then in law school and qualified to practice up in this part of the country, in Ontario. So I'm practicing law, and I'm making a living. Now, steps 6 and 7, I thought were drive-by steps. I paid lip service to them. And as I got a little more involved in the fellowship, when I returned to Renfrew, I read the word humbly in step 7, and then started saying prayers on my knees in the morning. But I was sober more than 20 years before I started doing that. So I got a call from a young fellow that I'd hired to take my place, and he said, "Joe, you heard that Neil died?" And I said, "Yes, I did." He was the fellow who became president. So I had. He said, "We can't find a will, and we've got a big dilemma. His family will end up having to head into probate court, and there may be some problems here." He said, "But if you were to sign an affidavit that I prepare and send up to you, that would make things easy for Neil. Would you do that?" And I said, "I'll think about it." And I hung up the phone. And of course, what was going through my head was, now's my chance. I'll get him. I talked to my sponsor, of course, thankfully, for sponsorship. And I called back the next day. I said, "I'd be happy to do it." What I'm trying to get at in this event in my life is, I'm sober in AA now 20 years or more. I've been forgiven a lot. And so what I did was sign the documents, or agree to sign this stuff and send it back. So there was forgiveness to me. It wasn't just forgiving. It was forgiving, but being forgiven. I had been forgiven as a sober member of this fellowship for years. So the forgiveness part, I really had to, it really came to me in a flash, but there it was. And there's the heart of the matter. I think step 6 and 7, the humbly in step 7. I was ready when I said I was entirely ready. But the humbly part, yeah, I guess I made an attempt by getting on my knees. But when I said I agreed to send, or was willing to send the documents back and forgive that man, that all that resentment left me. I never had another resentful thought about him to this day. Now, step 8 was another one. Step 9, my sponsor told me that, don't worry about step 9, because I was terrified of it. I thought once I had done steps 4 and 5 with him, the big one was step 9. I was going to have to reach out and look like a jerk to somebody that I had been a jerk to in my years of drinking. He said, don't worry about that. He said, you will know when, instinctively, you will know when you should do a 9th step. And he said, don't just carry on with your program. And that's sort of the way he talked to me. And I was with a group of people who went to Grand Falls, New Brunswick, walked in the door, and here was a priest that I had done some pretty nasty stuff to when I was a student in Fredericton. And I knew exactly what he said. He said, you will know instinctively when you're going to do this, and you'll do it. And it happened. So that's how I did my first step 9. But I want to get back to step 8 after I was sober for 35 years. I'd really never done a formal step 8. And, they tell us how simple these steps are. And so simple that I just, I would mentally go through a list in my head, made a list of all persons we had harmed. Yeah. Become willing to make amends to them all. Yeah. And that would be my step 8. My second sponsor had died. My third sponsor was a guy from Ottawa, John, and he encouraged me to sit down and write it out. So I took some time, sat down, and wrote out a list of all the persons I had harmed. And some of them were way in the past. Some were right in front of me, and that I lived with and were very close to. But it was just the act of writing it out. And I can't tell you what it did to me, but it was such a simple thing to do, just to sit down and write that out. I did it, and then John came up. We spent the weekend together. We did a couple of road trips around here, and we talked about it generally. That was my step 8. So my steps weren't all, linear, not a straight line. Like they were zigzag. They were 1 or 2 forward, back, up and down. And, I spent 5 years kind of dry. A good lesson. Don't recommend it to anybody. I think I dodged a bullet there. And step 10, I learned quite a lot from the monks. And when I was involved in some of the work in the church in Edmundston, I led a meditation group for about 3 years. And that was a good experience for me. And then I got away from that. Then I got away from organized religion again, when I came back up this way. And so I started thinking about journaling. Someone talked about journaling as a part of the 10th step process. So I got a journal and I started this. And I've been journaling for, I don't know, now I've got maybe 20 books. But my journaling was 10th step, and I'd write some notes. And now it's it's taken on a different flavor altogether. It's now my 11th step, and it's every morning. In the warmer months, I'm looking east and I see the sun come up. Now I'm up at 5 a.m. every day, and I'm writing, I'm praying. I try to remember to say the St. Francis prayer every day. But I think of, there's a new day, and there's never a day going to be the same as yesterday or another one like today. They're all different. And I'll meet new people. I make an attempt to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand him. But I'll tell you, sometimes I do this on my knees. I start my day with my third step prayer, and sometimes before I get to my feet, I'm inventing the day. I'm getting it all laid out for God. So I'm just not sure how to do that. I've got to work on it a lot more. I'm just a babe in the woods, but I work at it, and what happens happens. My old sponsor used to say, "Joe, stop trying to make it happen. Let it happen." So I want to jump back into some of the earlier days when I come in, and the importance of fellowship. I get into the books. It's kind of natural to me. I studied a lot. I like reading, and I would get into. I read William James's book, Varieties of Religious Experience, a couple of times, and someone said, "Oh, just read chapter 9." So I read chapter 9. They said, "No, you don't have to even bother chapter 9. There's only one word that's important, and it's experience." And I fully believe that today. It's as I pray and meditate, my awareness deepens. My awareness of my surroundings. I know it's God's work. When you look out, you can see the sun just starting to paint the tops of the hills, and you try to describe that with your pen. So it slows everything down. My mind slows down. My thoughts slow down, and I can really kick into the silence. And I have moments where, I get a feeling somewhere between my ribs that there's a lot of good in the world, and I just keep trying to do this every day. But to get back to what my sponsor was telling me one time about the books, I was throwing the learning stuff at him, and he said, sometimes people are educated beyond their capacity to learn. I know what he was saying. He was telling me that get off your ass and get into action, and just put the books aside for a while. So, but I still crack the books. I love them, and I read all that I can. I've read my big book I don't know how many times. Every time I read it, there's another take to come out of it. So that's where I'm at today. I had another experience recently. My wife of 57 years has really ran the household, and with the exception of a brief period where we had a parting on my dry date, we've been together all that time, and I can't begin to repay my debts there. So it's a continuing thing. And recently she fell and broke her pelvis, and so I had to become, for about 6 weeks, I did everything around the house. She's back to normal now. She's getting around, but I learned to appreciate an awful lot more what my wife does around the house, and the duties that she does. I mean, I learned to cook, do dishes, walk the dog. We were looking after a dog for a while, do laundry. keep the fires on. I want to tell you, it was a great experience. I loved it, and I've changed some of my habits. So I'm about at the end of my talk. So I'm probably going to say thanks for listening, and thanks for being here. All of you miracles, you're all part of my sobriety. God bless you. Thanks again.